Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
So before I say anything else, I think it's firstly the case. I should probably say, a lot of people probably know me at the moment as the guy who do inane tweets, one about apprenticeship, one about masters. Now, if you can join the dots, you can probably do some detective work and figure out that, somebody in apprenticeships into teaching while simultaneously stipulating a master's as, prerequisite. There's obviously some kind of prank, isn't it? Now, I did it as a devil's advocacy type maneuver to draw in as many different comments that as I possibly could, okay, which is some people would call this content mining. I'm happy to be a content miner, okay, and I'll sling my pickaxe over my shoulder and do it all again if I have to. Now, what I want firstly to establish is the reason I'm speaking to Clive today is because on both posts, very research-informed responses to my tweets in such a way as I almost couldn't respond to them, probably because, well, let's not say it was that I hadn't done my research, but I wasn't exactly well equipped at that time. Obviously, I've been away studying day in, day out since that. But because Clive seemed to be better informed than I was, I wanted to get his experiences, and I think he has a very valuable insight into the whole apprenticeships versus masters, and is getting into teaching too tricky and cumbersome, and also does a degree really assist with teaching. So good evening, Clive. I hope you're well, and would you mind telling us about your background and your pathway into the profession for us?
Hey up, Sam. So for me, I think if we go all the way back to sitting my GCSEs, really didn't do particularly well. Was I got enough to get on to go and do 3 A levels, and partway through the back end of year 12, I decided I was going to go and join the army. My physics teacher took me along to the careers office, got me an interview. I went in for the army apprenticeship.
Yeah. So
I ditched my A levels and joined in January, started my basic training with the Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineers. From there, so that apprenticeship there is a 2-year stint. From there, I was sent out to Germany after a short spell in near Reading, a place called Arborfield, working in their maintenance section.
Yeah.
From Germany, went over to the Balkans. So this was at the back end, so 1998, 1999. I left the army in 2001, having done 7 years, and went into logistics management. So I took the skills that I'd got from my apprenticeship, looking after fleets of vehicles, because I was electrical mechanical engineers.
Yeah.
So a fully qualified mechanic. Went into looked at the career options that were available to me on transitioning out of the army, and logistics management was a massive area where they needed to get people into. One of the things that the army does really well is when it's looking at resettlement, there's research that's done, and they'll go, well, these are your skills gaps in the market. These are the courses that you can get yourself onto, and you prepare yourself ready to what they call resettle into civilian life. Let's see. So if I go back to 2001, I left. 2004, I became an operations manager. So I was very young in my career in logistics, but also very young as a person to be able to move into such a position. Normally, in transport, it's very much dead man's shoes. Very old school sort of career sector, and I've reached my ceiling very quickly. Got to a point where I was very bored at work. I had 2 children, both had been in and out of hospital at the time, and work. I had problems with work of where my boss was chasing me to get into work after I was booked off for 2 weeks holiday.
Yeah.
My little boy was having an operation. We nearly lost him. We told he was very close to a cyst, and we would have lost him to septicemia had they not been carrying out the they were doing exploratory surgery, and so he ended up with a kidney being removed, and work were chasing me to come into work. So I got to a point of where I'd had enough, and the first May bank holiday of that year is the traditional Army versus Navy rugby match. And I was there with a few friends. One of my friends works at the Department for Education. And I was complaining to him about how bad work was, the fact that I wasn't enjoying what I was doing. I wanted to have a challenge. And I'd lost a friend to post-traumatic stress disorder. He took his life like the year before. And that was the that was the catalyst, really, of where I was reevaluating everything that was going on in my life.
Yeah.
His lad found it really difficult, and had said to me, my nickname was in the army was Jimmy, because I couldn't play football. I was a rugby player, so they nicknamed me Jimmy Hill. And he says, "Do you know what, Jim? I wish we had teachers like you at school, because nobody seems to get it." And those words were sort of ringing in my ears. My friend, while we were out, had said to me, "You should go into teaching. They snap your hand up." And I was like, "Well, do you know what? I don't have a degree, so that's going to be a massive barrier straight away." And then on the Tuesday that he went into work, my email inbox was just being pinged of all the routes to go into teaching, the support that was there for me to go and get my degree. And in all honesty, I ran out of arguments, and it was a case of, no, I need to go and do this. So I went into work. I handed my keys in, my mobile phone, my company car, and I said, "I'm leaving. That's it. That's me done." And they said, "What are you going to go and do?" So I said, "I'm off to become a teacher." And that was it. It was a massive leap of faith. What
I find when you say that, right, then, and this is part of the reason I've been so vocal on the whole apprenticeship thing, right, is because from my perspective, I would think of someone who's been in the army. They're a problem solver. They're out there. They're working through problems. They're practical people. Yeah. And I've known some people in education, for instance, if there is somebody who has a PhD or a master's, there's a kind of inverse snobbery where people might assume that the person with the PhD or master's is somehow less practical and less able at classroom management. It's a very strange phenomenon. I would never make such an assumption, because I'm obviously a very kind, lovely person. I'd never, make that sort of stereotype, but some people would. And so when I hear army, immediately I think, problem solver, action man, they can get the job done. So why not expedite this route in? Now, you ended up having to, but, from conversations with you, sounds like you quite enjoyed the academic experience, but it was around about 5-6 years or so, if you're talking about including getting the PGDE. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I looked at trying to get onto courses. Now I've got a raft of level 3, A-level standard qualifications, and not one university would touch me with a barge pole to go and get a degree. So I had to go to college and do an access to higher education course. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I learned so much about myself. But I think a lot of that came from my experience at school of being told that, but I had an English teacher who told me that kids like me should know their place and we don't go to university.
And actually say that to you?
Yeah, amongst a few other things. He's a really nice character, but I got my own back in the end. So he was very much a case of, you're too thick, you don't understand English. So why have you got these aspirations? So I originally wanted to become an officer, but I joined as another rank. And though I still had those words ringing in my ears when even in my final year at uni, at the age of 40, you still that still had that nagging doubt underneath. Am I good enough to do this? Can I actually get there? So I had the final 2 fingers up at him, because I dedicated my dissertation that I did on teaching practice to him. So it was a bit a sweet moment. So yeah, that was a year, 3 years at university. I went to Royal Holloway, did a biology degree, and then I went into teaching through Teach First. So my course was 2 years long. I did a postgraduate diploma in education, and but I got QTS at the end of my first year of the program. So 5 years to get QTS, but 6 years to get my actual teaching qualifications.
Yeah. Now, when you say that, the only thing I would think is that, for me personally, the idea of an apprenticeship, for instance, I know you've said that, you know, they can have different levels of quality. It's difficult to quality assure different apprenticeships. There might or might not be a final assessment at the end of it. How do you ensure that there's that uniformity of approach? Now, when it comes to me, I had two main issues with university as a pathway into teaching. Now, I know you said, you know, about 18-year-old apprentice teachers. I fully admit, yeah, that's a stupid idea. Okay, I'll give myself credit for coming up with a pretty stupid idea. Obviously, an 18-year-old teacher, it's like some Doogie Howser thing. He's going to rock up in like an oversized blazer. You know, it sounds like some kind of movie from the 1980s, doesn't it? Like Teen Teacher or something. It's just ridiculous. But what I think is that say you didn't have the chance to have the degree, like you were in the army, for instance, I would want to give people the opportunity to expedite the path in. And for me, it comes back to the apprenticeships. You said that, you know, they don't have all this standardization, there's poor quality assurance, but also we know about this two-tier situations with the university. And you said about the Russell Group situation where, you know, there's varying what demands for the degree isn't to get on the course, you know, and those actually align to whether you have a higher proportion of exam assessments at the end. Suggests that I'm assuming that you're equating a higher proportion of exam assessment with a more rigorous or more difficult degree. Is that correct? I'm not fully
yeah sure. If so, this was linking on to one of the tweets that you put out about of where people were sat inside the dorms and literally just spouting and citing when they're writing their assignments. And you were saying about the fact that, you know, without having that final exam, without you being able to sit that and be able to show true learning, was it actually worthwhile? And I think that there is a big difference. Now, I've got friends that went to other universities. One particular friend went to a university. I was given what would be the equivalent of unconditional offer. I just had to complete the course, that Access to IT course. So he went there, and his course was something like 80% coursework. And mine was 70 for each of my modules. It was 70 to 80% was it based on exam. Yeah. And I think that makes a huge difference to the way that things are perceived. Now, I went to a Redbrook University. It was deliberately one of my top choices. The other one would have been Reading University, because that was very close and commutable as well. Yeah. I think that we do already have an existing hierarchy within our universities, and
but don't you think that's right. Wrong? Don't you think? Yeah, it's not right. I don't think, and I've had another, you know, another incendiary tweet from my armory, where I spoke about universities having this lack of standardization. I feel so sorry for some people who might have gone to a university and they've sat the 3-year degree just like everyone else. But because of the perception, and we haven't measured every degree, we can't say for certain this degree was this amount more. You know, you can't say a 2.2 or a 2.1 from Oxford is worth the same as a first from Oxford Brookes. You can't say that with definite meaning, and if it doesn't have a shared meaning, I feel like the assessment is flawed. So I see what you're saying, and the fact that you've got into a red brick, it's obviously good for you and your career path in terms of getting you into teaching. But I don't know about you, but do you not think that maybe a degree should have some kind of standard, like Teaching Soup on Twitter says, that they should have a standardized final assessment that's implemented across the entire country, so that way higher ed, you know, if I say I got 3 A stars at A level, then people know that I've got some decent A levels. But if I say I got a first, they say, well, where'd you get the first from? What's the first in? What proportion of was coursework, and etc., you know? If you can't immediately determine the value of the qualification just from hearing it, then isn't that a problem? Now I can see that clearly Arianath wants to call in at some point. You will get a chance to call in. Don't worry about that. We're doing calls in at 6:50. That's when I've got it scheduled on my phone. That's when we're going to do some serious dial-ins and hear your views. But yeah, I don't know whether you'd be on board with that, Clive, like a centralized exam board that could institute university finals across the country. That way the institutional provenance of the degree might matter less, perhaps.
I think it's really difficult for them to be able to do that because there's so much variation between universities on what their their specialisms are. So Royal Holloway is very much into plant science. So a lot of the courses that you sit as a biologist have got a leaning towards plant science because that's where the research is done there. The funding comes into the university from there, so that's where you get your experts. So it's very difficult to go down that route without you having what is essentially a teaching university as opposed to having something that is a research university.
Yeah, I see. That is a good point. That's a good.
I'd be massively in favour of actually saying that there's a standardisation across the board with the way that universities assess, because I think that realistically that is probably going to be the biggest leveler. So if you know that every university is going to go to say a 60% exam, 40% coursework to place somewhere in the middle field. I think that's probably the fairest way of being able to do it, because you do have universities where there isn't much research done in certain areas, certain courses. There's perhaps not as much research done at those universities compared to others. But realistically, I could have got a 2-2 from Oxford Brookes instead of the 2-1 from Royal Holloway, or friends that have got firsts at Sheffield. And going into teaching, it really wouldn't have mattered. It might have made a difference to the route that I took in, and it may even make a difference to some of the schools that I might get into, because I've seen quite a few job adverts where they're after universities like I went to, as opposed to the universities that I didn't. And I think that's massively unfair, because at the end of the day, your degree is your specialism, but then you move your teaching practice is largely done by universities that aren't red brick.
Yeah, what I will say, that is a good point as well, and I definitely will move on to that. And in terms of the quality, I want to talk about. But let me tell you a little bit about the Mr. Elliot life, okay? Because when I teach, right, I'm a historian, I'm a humanities person, I'm a geographer. I teach rivers one day, I teach Elizabethan religious settlement the next. So it's very various. I basically teach, if I teach history and geography, that can mean I teach literally anything that's ever happened on planet Earth, right? So there's no way for me to have become a specialist, because if I find that what university does is it sort of narrows the funnel, as you said, there's high degree of specialism. So if I'm at university, I might be studying Elizabethan religious settlements to the extent that, I've got photographically memorized the vestments of different prelates within the Anglican Church. But that wouldn't help me teach the subject, right? What would help me teach the subject is if I said to myself, right, what are the key dates? What are the key events? How can I relate them to the children? And over time, the more I relate those key events to the kids, I might get some kind of feedback from that, like a sort of what Robin Hogarth calls a kind domain, where the kids their eyes will light up at some silly story I've told, and I'll be like, right, well, I'll use that again. And I'm only using a small subset of knowledge, really. I might be using 1558, the year of the religious settlement. I might have some of the names of the different acts, like the Act of Uniformity, the Act of Supremacy, the Royal Injunctions, right? I might know what they are, and I might tell the old story so that the kids can understand. I might say Catholicism was really fancy, Protestantism was more subdued in their forms of worship or translation of the Bible. And if certain kids, for instance, I teach some kids who are Muslim, for instance, and I say to them, what do they think about a religious text being written in a language that isn't English or isn't German, what would they think of that? And they have their own personal view on that, because the Bible, the Quran, is written in Arabic. So for them, that's a good segue into the topic for those pupils, those children. But I couldn't have learned that at university. I could never have learned to storify the small set of content at university. So I suppose that's where my whole notion of degree being less useful for me comes in. I don't know if you'd like to tell us how your degree, because I know is it chemistry or is it engineering that you did?
Oh no, no, I did biology, which really throws people. So most people wonder why I didn't go into physics, and it's because astrophysics is not mechanical engineering. So they're worlds and worlds apart. Whereas there's probably more overlap between engineering and biology than you'd actually believe. So went to the biology degree. It meant that I had to have an understanding of the chemistry, which filled some of the skills gaps that I had. So I was really methodical with thinking about what degree I wanted to do and how that would benefit me getting into teaching. And I think perhaps that might be the difference between the two of us. When I went to do my degree, I knew I was going to become a teacher.
Right.
So when I was going along for the ride, essentially, it was every time I picked a course, it was like, am I interested in it? How is this going to help me when I go into teaching? How am I going to be a better biology teacher by having covered this module rather than having covered this other module? So I tried to get a broad scope across biology rather than going too specialised.
How does it link to your everyday classroom practice? That's what I'm curious of, because you say about the gaps in knowledge and you've acquired all this vast scientific knowledge. Obviously, learning is very important and it's a lifelong journey. But how would you say it explicitly relates to your classroom? Because in terms of my discipline, it doesn't really, because I can pluck from all random different knowledge domains. It can change every term, what we're teaching. So how does your degree actually relate to what you teach on a daily basis?
Well, I have to teach chemistry and I teach physics, and I teach these at GCSE as well. So it's not, I don't just teach them at K stage 3, and I'm able to make the links between all three subjects, so that students can actually see that we've got three distinct disciplines within the sciences that we teach, and they can see how, for example, particles is a golden thread that weaves its way through. So we teach the particle model in chemistry, we teach it in physics as well, and then both of those play into each other. We can then take that across into biology, and we can look at cells. So we can look at how particles diffuse through the cell membrane, and you get glucose and oxygen going into the cell. You get carbon dioxide coming out of the cell. Just for a really rudimentary explanation, and being able to make those links across those three subjects, I wouldn't be able to do as well unless I had the secure founding knowledge that I got from my degree. I wouldn't be able to see the big picture as easily.
Yeah, that does make sense. But do you think that, for instance, so I'll just say a couple of things first, because I think this is a relatively decent argument for me, someone who's a pretty unabashed, beta of teachers on Twitter. This is actually quite a nuanced argument that I've created, so I'm pretty proud of myself. But what I think is this: for instance, if you get a PGCE and you don't do NQT, that lapses after 5 years. But then if you do a degree, you can always use that to enter the profession, right? So there could be a situation where someone has done their degree 10 or 20 years ago and they haven't studied the knowledge and they don't really have it. Whereas there's barriers for people who might have studied the A-level in all the sciences and all the maths. They might have 4 or 5 exceptional graded A-levels in that subject, and they wouldn't be able to get in without a degree. So I did ask you whether you think that an SKE, for instance, would be a good option for someone who does have either a lot of experience, or A-level grades that are really top tier, one of those two that would at least show they have that ability. Do you think an SKE or subject knowledge enhancement would be a good way of allowing a candidate to become a teacher without a degree?
I think that we need to split the two apart. So if you look at a degree that have that prerequisite knowledge, But if you look at your teaching degree, it's not the same. It's about having that pedagogical content knowledge, and that's what's critically important.
When you say pedagogical content, what do you mean by pedagogical content knowledge?
So not just so as you've said before, you can have somebody that's got a PhD that is an absolute expert in their field. These are the people that are at the top of their game, at that very, very narrow tip of the pyramid. Yeah. But they might not be able to explain it simply. They can't teach it. Pedagogical content knowledge is about knowing how to teach a concept, knowing how to use models, so especially in science, knowing how to get that information distilled down to the bare bones so that students can understand it, and to know those misconceptions that keep coming up. So that's your pedagogical content knowledge, and that's what you look at when you're doing your PGCE. Now, with a ski, I did one for chemistry because I hadn't touched chemistry since 1993, so I think it was about 20 years from me studying chemistry to me actually even going on to do my access to HE course. So, and chemistry was my weakest subject. I still didn't find that there was enough knowledge there on that ski for me to be able to fill all the gaps. I had to do a lot of on-the-job training, and I wouldn't have had that had I not been in schools. So I don't think a ski would necessarily be the best route to come into teaching, but I do appreciate that being inside a classroom, being able to teach be able to have my knowledge from my PGCE of how to teach something and what to look for, meant that I was better equipped to look at a subject that I wasn't an expert in, to be able to break that down to what those key concepts were, what those misconceptions were, and be able to teach that. So there is kind of an argument there, isn't there, of where an apprenticeship or on-the-job training, which we already kind of have with skits and Teach First, would be worthwhile.
Yeah, I think that's what's missing, and I think that's where things like instructional coaching and being at the classroom, that's what needs to happen. Because let me tell you a story, Clive. Let me tell you two little quick stories, and then I'm gonna play a word from our sponsor. But these little stories, okay. So I had a tutor, a PGC tutor, lovely person. If he's out there, a great guy. All right. Now he did have the odd session that was quite lackluster. For instance, he was teaching us. Well, he was a professed sort of pedagogue. It was about pedagogical knowledge. But here's what happened: we rocked up to Birmingham, and he was going to teach us how to conduct a field trip. So he said, "Right, you're in Birmingham. Go and look at the museum and walk around Birmingham and come back at 3." Okay, so that was the caliber of the PGC that I was sitting. There was a case of, okay, well, that's not teaching me anything. This is discovery learning on a PGC, and you're expecting me to find out for myself how to conduct a field trip by going on a field trip. It's madness. Also, there was another one, even more egregious, I think, where we had to endure, and I say endure because I was dropping off. I don't know if you've been in that sort where you're about to sleep and you're like blinking, but the blinks last longer and longer. It was something he downloaded off Tez, like 300 slides of differentiation, and he stood at the front of that board and he just read them, and he read each slide, each one, changing the slides with renewed vigor, just coming at us, trying to keep us awake. It didn't work.
Animations.
It had no animations, zero animation games. It was all static, So this was something that I had to endure, and it did not help me because it wasn't what you talk about, where you're talking about what is a good way of explaining the concept. I've used the example frequently, a lot of geographers do, tectonic plates. Imagine a hard-boiled egg dropped on the floor. That looks kind of like the tectonic plates. You could use the same egg analogy for the core and the crust or whatever. If you're talking to little year 7s or something, you just want to give them a little hook to grasp onto. So, I agree with you, but I guess the difference is that I feel that the PGC currently, as I experienced it, was not very good. But that might be different. And as a little interesting addendum to that, that wasn't at a red brick university. It was at or whatever color bricks the other unis have got, but the Breeze Block University, right? I was learning it down there. So, right, I'm gonna play a word from our sponsor then, and then when the advert is concluded, myself and Clive will be returning. So I'll be back with you in just a moment, Clive. All right?
Yeah.
Introducing Amanda Davey. Amanda is one of the first specialist teacher assessors for dyscalculia in the UK and offers dyscalculia tutoring and bespoke training for schools. With 26 years of teaching and tutoring experience in the UK, Amanda offers specialist online tuition focused on building confidence and developing skills. Amanda also offers online and face-to-face training on dyscalculia for educators, informing practitioners as to how to identify children that may have dyscalculia and how to support them in class. Find out more about Amanda and what she can offer you at www.amanda-davey-dyscalculia.co.uk.
Okay, so wonderful word from our sponsor there, and obviously great course. So what I will say is then back to the topic at hand, the SKE. Obviously it's a good idea, it works for some, but you have talked to me a little bit about, well, you've talked about a tale of two teachers, really. There's teachers with all the requisite qualifications, for instance, who might do badly, and then there's those who seemingly don't have any, and they might be cover supervisors, or they might be TA or whatever, but they can do the business. So my only question would be, where it was said to me, a couple of cruel things on Twitter were said about teacher apprenticeships become a race to the bottom, or it's desperation. And I wasn't a massive fan of those comments, simply because, we're trying to put some kids into apprenticeships currently, and the suggestion that it's somehow lesser or worse or not optimal, I'm not a massive fan of that. I don't really agree with it, but there is an argument to be made here, and I've contrasted it with IT, where many apprentices do go on to slot into senior managerial roles and do very well for themselves. But obviously there is a possibility of teacher apprenticeships becoming a race to the bottom. And why do you and so many other people who responded to my tweet, a lot of people thought this, but why could it result in a race to the bottom if we did introduce a teacher apprenticeship without a subject degree as a requirement?
I think this plays into two parts. We've got the fact that we've got society doesn't value teachers as a whole, not as much as they probably do in other nations. And then we've got the fact that teachers seem to look down on other qualifications. So we're our own worst enemies at times, I think. I think that we've got issues. So if I use your example there of where you've said about having a TA, I work with one of our former TAs at the moment. She's trained to be an English teacher. Her degree's in law, and she's so passionate. She works excellently with the students. She's amazing with the staff. And she's grafted to go into become an English teacher. So she's had to teach well outside of her domain. And I think an apprenticeship would work really well with her because she already has that prerequisite, doesn't she? And there's that element of where, as teachers, we're guardians of, or ambassadors of knowledge and of academia. And we should be selling the fact that getting qualifications is a good thing to students. So, even coming from working class background and having all of these trade qualifications, it's the advice that I give to every student that I teach. Is it a lot of the time it was like, do we have to do science? Why do we have to do science? I was like, it's 2 GCSEs. These are the things that you're going to learn that you can apply to other aspects of your life. What do you want to go and do? I want to go into hair, I'll do hair and beauty. Okay, so you're going to need to know chemistry. You're going to need to know biology. You're going to need to know elements of physics. And you explain that to them and you put it into context and it works. Students really then start to understand the importance of why you're teaching them that knowledge. And I think that the issues that we have with this this almost snobbery, really. It's to do with the fact that I've looked at careers that, as part of my master's dissertation, I looked at the careers provision in areas of social deprivation, and there's massive blind spots within that caused by like the middle classness of the profession. And there's this ideology that to be successful you have to go to university, and I think that quite often teachers have a look at that. But when we then consider, there's this big push towards getting a degree, and we've got a paucity in degree status, and I can't see the state of play ever changing when it comes to social deprivation from that. And are we influencing the way that teaching's being molded by saying, well, it's just going to be a race to the bottom with an apprenticeship? We're not looking at the fact that if I'm going to be if I'm going to employ a DT teacher, is having somebody with a degree in engineering necessarily going to be the right degree to have somebody that's compared to somebody that's got 25 years experience as a carpenter, who's going to be able to and has got perhaps A levels in or been able to go and do an SKE in resistive materials, or somebody that's an engineer that's is qualified to use lathes, to use CAD CAM, because that's their background. And I think that there's that snobbery almost between academic subjects and the vocational subjects, and it's something we need to change.
I agree with you fully, and I think as well it links back to real people and the lives of real people. I got a friend of mine who managed to get onto an IT apprenticeship, for instance, and he's told me some interesting things about that. He's actually said that in his workplace, a lot of the time the graduates they're part of the two-tier system of apprentices and graduates, and often the graduates are looked down upon because they're seen as somehow less practical and less able to sort of hack through some problem and come up with that's just the way it's seen in his particular industry. It might be different in others, right? Now he's scrambled his way to the top. He's a consultant. He's done pretty well out of it, right? And he still does. He's got a car. He's got a house. He's won. He's completed life essentially, right? Now, he still has a chip on his shoulder about a degree, and I might make a joke in the group chat about a degree and not even meaning it maliciously, almost saying, you're earning more than me and I haven't got a degree. But he would take that quite personally, because he would interpret it through the sort of lens of him having a chip on his shoulder, and it would annoy him. Similarly, if we go back to old Andrew's scenes from the battleground, one of the teachers who was best able to survive and thrive in that battleground was a man named Paul Boyd, who was a design teacher, just as you've been talking about design teachers. And he didn't have a degree. He worked through some kind of scheme that allowed him to get, because the school was a technology school. And he was a very interesting character. A lot of the high tariff boys were super scared of him because he looked like Henry VIII, and he turned red like a cherry tomato if you dropped a spanner or something. He had a key ring that was a metal plate that had been used for his arm. It had been extracted from his arm because it had been he's just an all-round legend, basically, just an absolute boss dog. But he didn't have a degree, and is one of the most sort of revered teachers in the history of the schools that Andrew's talking about in his blog. So I do find it very interesting that this professional snobbery, teachers like that, or my friend, the fact that they might see their life as somehow incomplete because they don't have a piece of paper from a certain institution, or if somebody does have a piece of paper from a certain institution but it's the wrong one, what's that about? I just think it's such madness, and it's definitely not assessment.
Yeah, and I think the only thing that we've missed so far is that to be able to teach A level, you need to have a degree in that area. I know that's something I put in the document I sent it back over to you. You as a biologist, I wouldn't be teaching physics or chemistry at A level because my subject knowledge is so important at that point, because you're preparing students to go to university. But then again, that is that difference, because you're not going to get somebody that's going to come out of industry that's been working in science without that sort of level, without having a science degree. So it's kind of cyclical. I've got such an eclectic route into teaching that I don't fit into that sort of box. But I know of people that have career change, that have got backgrounds in, that have worked in industry, that have worked in the pharmaceutical industry, for example, that have now become a chemistry teacher. And I think they are absolutely critical. If you can get hold of one of these, that's hen's teeth. But in exactly the same way that if you've got somebody that is going to be teaching a vocational subject and is going to be taking students to a level 3 level, you need to have people that have got expertise, and that expertise is realistically going to come from having done the job day in, day out.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And also, we do have a question from Matt Lewis. So it says, where do you propose you get the high caliber teachers with a relevant subject degree when secondary is losing staff by the bucket loads?
Do you know what? I haven't got an answer for that. I really, really haven't. The only way that we're ever going to change get people to career change and come into teaching is going to be when you've got people that that want to come into a career that is constantly being beaten up. People talk about resilience all the time, but even being ex-forces, marching through the streets, being shouted at, sworn at, spat at, called a baby killer and all sorts, it's still not been as stressful as going into teaching, putting everything on the line, putting family life on hold to make sure that you get stuff in place for other people's children, to then be told that you're lazy, that you're not doing enough, that you don't care enough, that you can't be bothered. It was quite interesting during lockdown to see people's perceptions of NHS workers compared to teachers. And my wife being a midwife, she'll quite happily tell you that she went in and her job hadn't changed that much. Yeah. But there was people out on the street clapping for her. And on our street, on her night out, on a night off, she'd be out there clapping, and people would go, "Oh, this is for you. You're a hero." And she's sitting there thinking, well, he's just been in there teaching for the last day, then making telephone calls home to students to make sure they understand the work, then speaking to parents, then making sure, helping to make sure that they get their free school meals. But people don't see that because we're seen as political football.
Well, I'll tell you what, Clive.
Change that narrative.
I'll tell you what. When I was working from home, right, I remember when working from home first rolled around, and my mates are in IT, so they were like, "Oh, working from home, that'll be difficult." And I was like, "What are you on about? I'm working from home." I said, "I'm basically going to be chilling from home," and I started abbreviating it as CFW for a joke. Believe me, it was no joke, right? Working from home, their workload seemed to increase exponentially, and it was suddenly so much more heavily about documentation. It was creating PowerPoints, creating schemes, we had to make sure that there's things in place when we return, seating plans. It seemed like everything had some kind of knock-on effect. I don't know if it came from the top. I don't know if it came from parents lobbying head teachers, but it was extremely difficult, especially when you're teaching a full timetable on Microsoft Teams, which is an entirely new platform. It's a new interface for you, isn't it? I mean, it was so difficult. And the fact that people didn't recognize that, and then you have managers and kids to cater for, as well as a disgruntled public who think you're all a bunch of scroungers. I see entirely what you're saying, and I think it was outrageous that we were put through that situation, but with so little renown or respect for what had been done. I think many people with kids who witnessed the Microsoft Teams and Google Classrooms lessons firsthand, I think they knew. But I think if you don't have kids, or if you weren't witnessing live lessons, maybe you saw asynchronous ones instead, you might not have known how challenging it was. So I fully agree with you on that, Clive. That was a very challenging time. So when we think about the whole degree in the classroom thing, I am going to move on from it soon, simply because I'm going to get on to the more fruitful and more the one that EduTwitter liked even more, which was the stipulation of a master's for teaching, which I know people just love that, yeah, because I got ratioed into the shadow realm off that one. But I do want to ask you just one more question. So, in terms of, you know what, let's just dive into the master's question because it's a good one. I'm eager to get into it. So, what do you think, Clive? Should we, inverted commas, upgrade the profession and stipulate that teachers need at least a master's to qualify? Finland is often trotted out as an example. However, we know from Tim Oates that educational researchers of the noughties ignored the period of sustained educational improvement, along with the many different socioeconomic factors contributive to Finland's success. So what is your opinion on this quite obviously facetious tweet? What do you think about it? Could there be any basis to it? What's your thoughts on it, Clive?
I think if we were to do this at the moment, it's going to be a detriment to the profession. We've got a recruitment, we've got a retention issue, and that's got to be addressed first. So making it harder to enter the profession is just going to be unwise, isn't it? But I can see the argument that, you know, it's a prerequisite to enter teaching in countries where teaching has a better status in that society. But I don't think you can place it solely on academic qualifications that teachers have got there. You know, so my undergraduate dissertation looked at East Asian culture and you know, Confucianism. That influences the culture there massively. It elevates the role of the teacher. And I think we've lost to that culturally here in the UK. And you know, we've just got this massive hearts and minds battle to take on. And we're back to that political football again, of where 1 minute we're heroes during lockdown because parents have realised just what we have to do, and then the next minute we're the whipping boys because the parents have had enough of being at home with their students, or their children with our students. And they think that we're doing nothing. We're not doing enough. So
I think what you're saying about Confucianism is pretty interesting because, and I just want to say to people out there as well, that we are going to be doing calls in a few minutes. So if you're wanting to dial in, you know, let us know in the chat if you're going to do this. It's obviously very helpful if you do. We'll be happy to take calls in about 2 or 3 minutes. Let's say 51 past, yeah, or 9 minutes to if you're being fancy. Now, the one thing I think when you're saying Confucianism, I think it's hard for me to get my head around. Are teachers high status or not? Because when I did the apprenticeship one, I had people quote tweeting me in America saying, you know, who is this schmuck? He thinks teachers are, you know, some jokers. I had people saying, you know, let's turn plumbers into teachers and stuff like that. And look, there's nothing wrong with being a plumber, but I know that was intended as a, you know, a dig at plumbers. Maybe a plumber could be a good teacher. I don't know. Like, but then I go get my hair cut, right? And they say, what do you do? And I say, you know what? I'm a teacher. And they say, oh, mate, I don't know how you do that. Attitude City, I don't know how you handle that. And I say to them, look, it's not as bad as you think. You know, it's actually quite a good career. I really enjoy it. I find it very gratifying. But they're just in disbelief and they go on shaking their heads. And I think I have actually said this to one of my mates who was a plumber, and he was pitying me for being a teacher. So are we high status? Are we low status or not? If we did stipulate a master's, could that conceivably raise the status of the profession? Because if you look, I do think it's more of a retention. You've said recruitment and retention. I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's more of a retention crisis than a recruitment one. What if we did stipulate a master's, the pay could go up slightly, maybe improve classroom conditions somehow or something of that sort? Could the master's ever conceivably result in a Finland style transformation?
I think that I would like to see people do what I've done. So everything you've said there, I completely, you know, I echo that. You know, I've got friends that are cleaners all the way up to university professors, and you know, it is very interesting to see that, you know, across that whole spectrum, one-on-one, people will look at us and say, I don't know how you do it. I think that's amazing that you're a teacher. But I think sometimes I'll use an old army analogy. So they used to say that the REME, the Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineers, was like horse manure. If you spread it out everywhere, it did everything the world of good. But if you dump it all in one place, it just turns to be a big pile of horse manure. And it's I think it's true when it comes to people's attitudes towards teaching. You know, one-on-one, you have a conversation with people, and they think that we are amazing at what we do. And they appreciate everything that we do. But as soon as you then start to get the media involved, and you'll have one person that doesn't like teachers for whatever reason, because you know everybody's got that one teacher that they remember they didn't like. As soon as that comment comes on, it opens the floodgates up, doesn't it? And then people then start to have pops, and the media narrative gets spun. We become that political football. But with getting back onto the masters, I think that for me, when I did my my PGDE, I knew I wanted to go and do a masters, and my masters is in leadership in learning. And I think that there's value in perhaps going down that route of where you don't need a masters to get into teaching, but the goal should be that you do your PGCE and then you move on through. And so you eventually get a masters, and I think that's something that would probably play into both camps then, wouldn't it? You're doing your apprenticeship because you're working it. You've got your qualifications. You're working as a teacher in the classroom. You're picking up your pedagogical content knowledge. You're picking up you're getting better at behaviour management. You're getting better at planning.
Yep.
You then start to then stretch yourself academically. And for the students that I teach, and for my own children, seeing me having done this and doing a masters, that they actually, the kids that I teach find it really strange that I'm a teacher but I'm still at school. So
I find that a bit strange, because I would have thought you would have sort of mastered so much from your experiences in the army, in the university, all those things. But I do think we got some people wanting to call in. I said I would do at 51 or 52. If anyone wants to call in, we're just having a discussion, really. It's pretty low stakes. Call in, ask me some questions, ask Clive some questions, and we'll be more than happy to discuss with you what your thoughts are. Someone called Bex wanting to call in. Go on, Bex, give it a go. Why not? If you got a pressing question, let me know what you're thinking about masters. Should we be recruiting people without masters, with degrees, etc., etc.? I've got Eugene McFadden calling in. I'm going to invite him. Could you do that again, Eugene? You disappeared. I'm going to invite you when you come up again, and then you can. There's a call-in button. There you go. Yes, Eugene, you're right.
Can you hear me?
Eugene McFadden, you're right, mate.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. If you could a bit louder, that would be nice.
Okay, let me just wander over to my Wi-Fi. Oh,
that's good, actually. Yeah, that's good. What are you thinking, Eugene?
I'm thinking. Oh, hello, everyone. I'm thinking. I don't know. Sometimes I think the whole idea of masters in education is a good idea, but it depends upon what's on that master's a little bit. Because, it could be completely irrelevant to actual classroom craft kind of thing. Doing a master's, is that going to make you a better teacher? That's got to be the first question it's got to be asked, hasn't it?
Why don't we think first off then, right? Clive, what do you reckon? If Eugene's saying that, is the masters going to make you a better teacher? Do you think masters currently do make you a better teacher?
I think it'd be difficult for me to comment specifically, because my masters is in leadership in learning. It's not actually in classroom practice. But if we go back to our shared experience with the same university for our PGCE, PGDE, it can be very, very much led by particular pedagogies. And I think that probably plays a massive part in how a master's in education's delivered. I do know of somebody that's doing a master's in education at the moment, and because they are very much evidence-based and research-based. When it comes to them actually having to write assignments, they really are struggling with what's the point, because I'm not actually gaining anything from this. I'm being asked to produce a piece of work as a group and then reflect on that piece of work. You know, how is that, as Eugene says, making you a better teacher? How is that making you better at your craft? I'm going to do a shameless plug here. The Chartered College of Teaching with a Chartered Teacher qualification, or the Royal Society of Biology, or they do a Chartered Teacher qualification as well. Those sort of qualifications, if we were to take those and make them master's level or a master's qualification, I think it's definitely worthwhile doing, because you're focusing on your craft. You're becoming a better teacher through it. And I think that is critical if we're going to make a master's, master's in education, the prerequisite to remain in teaching, or to, as the goal for a long-term teaching career.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Also, as well, Eugene, you said about people being paid more, moving away from the classroom. What do you mean by that?
Well, like, it's almost like the less you're in a classroom, the more you get paid. So when you move into like SLT or whatever, you then go to a whole different scale, like literally a leadership pay scale, which is above that. And you have like, to go beyond, like, once you get into UPS, to go beyond that, you need additional responsibilities. And realistically, to do those additional responsibilities, you need to have less time teaching in order to be doing those things, those teaching and learning things. So, the impetus really is, the more you do, like, to go further, you got to leave the classroom. So, and that again becomes like a drain as well upon that kind of classroom craft.
It's a brain drain, isn't it?
Yeah,
we're deliberately setting a career path that is for you to be seen as doing well. You have to leave the classroom, and your pay gets capped. You've got to take on those extra responsibilities, but it's not necessarily any different than when I'd have transport clerks. And my transport clerks would have had a particular role. They're very customer focused, or they'd be very driver focused, with dealing with the drivers that are on the road. I then have my supervisors who would be the leadership. I've got those transport supervisors that's our middle leadership. They were the engine room of the classroom. Of the business. And they were the ones that would be making sure that the fleets were maintained, that the drivers' rotas were done, that routing was done, and they got paid differently. And it took them away from what was that core aspect of their job. And I don't know if there's any other way around being able to pay more, because budgets are incredibly tight. You're always going to want more from your classroom teachers for more money. I mean, that's a whole part of UPS, isn't it? Once you're on UPS, you're supposed to be doing more whole school stuff, because that's sort of the expectations. I know in one trust in particular, of where all those small TLRs that were brought in, they were chipped away and they were brought in as UPS tasks, and you had to do one of those to get paid UPS.
Well, let me just add something, because I think one of the funniest things, I'm going to get to Tom Rogers' comment in a minute as well, because that's made me laugh, right? But what I think we're confused status with ability, and status with talent. And the question is, who do you value more? Do you value the teacher who goes in, does the business, high tariff kids, knocks it out of the park, 5 days a week, 4 to 5 period days, just smashing it? Or do you value the person who's barely teaching at all, but they do a lot of meetings, with the different schools, and they're there on the banners of the schools doing photo shoots or whatever? Who do you value more? Is status really about the pay grade that you have, or what car that you drive, or where you got your degree from, or what university you got that degree from? As Roger says, I've seen teachers with masters, PhDs, first class from Oxbridge, who could not control any classroom and got walked all over and left with tail between legs, which is that's quite a funny one. But I think maybe that status might play a role in that. But
you got as well. You got status, and you got pay, and you've got effectiveness, and that's 3 different things. and then you've got effectiveness within the classroom, effectiveness, for want of a better word, out and about in the corridors. It's I think part of it is just teachers become a very, very complicated beast, and we just, the idea that if you're management, you're one thing, but you're still a teacher. Whereas if you're in a classroom for 90% of contact and just doing what you're meant to be doing, you're more background. You're not seen as being that important, but actually you are the most important thing there. I'm saying it really badly, but
No, I think I understand exactly what you do mean, and I just think, well, would you agree with this? What would you think about this, Eugene? Because I've mentioned this tweet a few times before, but it really resonated with me. And I know that some of the high performing education systems have a flatter management structure than we have in the UK, but Tom Rogers ages ago tweeted that maybe we should remove most of the major promotions and have a flat structure where every teacher takes on more responsibilities and duties with higher pay, and maybe just retain some of the more crucial SLT positions, or like departmental heads, for instance, or things like that. Would you agree, Eugene, with that sort of structure, a sort of flatter structure where more teachers take on more responsibility and ownership, but with fewer of this, or with less of this progression and getting a TLR or SLT title? Would you agree with something like that?
I don't know. I think I might. I need to think about it though. Possibly. I don't know how it would look in terms of the actual. Because I look at the American system, where you've got teachers and you've got administrators, and that doesn't work. From my limited understanding, from looking at the outside, that looks like a system whereby it's too separate, it's too different. But what are you talking about? You're still a teacher though. It's just.
I think that
Go on, Clive.
I think that makes a massive difference, doesn't it? You need to have people that understand what teaching is. And yeah. Eugene, you've been in the game a lot longer than me, and I know that there was a point where they've trialed this. They've brought in bank managers to become principals in schools, and they've fallen flat on their backsides. It's not worked.
It's not. It's complex a beast.
Yeah, you need to. Stuart Locke and I've bumped heads on this a few times, of where we're looking at transferable skills from outside of education. And for me, there are lots of transferable skills, but you need to learn how to apply those in a new context. So you can't take somebody from a bank and expect them to be able to lead a school. It's just impossible. If I go back, Sam keeps talking about the army. You go back to then, they used to have a thing that used to be called the Queen's Trooper. So somebody that had never been promoted in their 22-year career and left as a trooper was given the same pension as a regimental sergeant major. And that was in recognition of the fact of, I could still remember the one that was in the regiment I was attached to, Zit Smith. He was a private, but if he went and told you to do something, you did it as if you were told to by the RSM. Because everybody he had the respect from everybody. He knew what was going on, and I look at teachers that I've come across in schools. I've got one that is she retired from teaching, but she's now one of our TAs, and she knows everything that I could possibly want to about SEND. She's an amazing teacher. But she's not afforded the credit that she's due for the role. You look at look at Hayley Hughes, for example, absolutely fantastic classroom teacher, but has felt the pressure that she needs to progress into leadership for her to be seen as a success. She's a book author, and Zoe Enser wrote about this in her piece for the TES last week, didn't she? Of where there's lots of other ways to progress in teaching and still remain in a classroom. And these people have had a massive influence on myself, of where I want. For me, it was Teach First was very much a case of you're going to fly, you can become a head teacher, very, very quickly. And I've wanted to make sure that my progression is sustainable, and that I'm exploring other avenues. I'm wanting to forge a career for myself, not following somebody else's footsteps to fly up the ladder as quickly as I possibly can. And I think we need to afford teachers that opportunity.
Well, let me just say one. So in terms of what you're saying, okay, first off, let me just tell you a quick story. All right, I got a story for you. So once upon a time, there was a country called Belgium, yeah, but then they didn't have a government for ages. And it was like a year or two, they were out, but they had no government in charge. Now, Belgium, believe it or not, they did not disintegrate and collapse into some kind of civil war based on different dialects or whatever, right? They've kept going, they've kept going fine. What I'm wondering is, and in relation to the Tom Rogers tweet, what I was trying to say was, you know, maybe there's been a proliferation of managerial positions. And my question is, do too many cooks spoil the broth? Because everyone's stirring that pot these days. And a lot of people are making money. You know, there's head of Nasuit saying the snouts need to come out the trough in relation to the Uber promotions, you know, the super school ones where it's, you know, heads of maths and CEOs and all this stuff. And I suppose what I'm wondering is, if there were a model with a flat distribution of teachers who could conceivably work like Belgium did, without all of the interference, right? Could the teachers taking more responsibility and ownership conceivably run the school with more minimal number of managers and, you know, all these leads and stuff like that? That's the question I suppose I was asking.
I've got two real life perspectives on that.
Mm-hmm.
So in Hertfordshire, oh God, about 7 years ago, there was a school. Head teacher was on long-term sick for like 2 years, and effectively the middle leaders in the SLT, there's no school. There's just middle leaders basically ran the place in the end. It was really like that, and you know, basically, and that worked really well without a head. You know, and it just kind of just everything was working. They had quite nice kids. No one really missed a head for like, must have been like, I don't know, 20 months or so. It just happened. But it worked. So, you know, they didn't have that one person making decisions. We had a kind of SLT kind of like just getting on with things, and the middle leaders basically running everything on a day-to-day basis, and it was fine. And, you know, exam results are great, not a problem. But my current place, the funding, we have got, bear in mind, 1,500 kids. We've only got effectively 5 SLT, you know, across, you know, 1,500 kids. So trying to do like a lot of different jobs in this current current climate is really difficult. Because, you know, so, you know, I think it depends. That's the problem in it. It depends. It just depends upon the school, the clientele, you know, COVID, you know, it's too complex to have almost like it's too complex to have a one size fit all thing, you know.
And that's a big issue with trust, isn't it? Trusts are very much a case of, this is our model, this is how it works, and this is what we're going to put in place in this school. Yeah,
and it's like
I agree with you. I think my issue is relating to what Jasmine's saying about wanting the quandary of wanting to be just a teacher. Look, I see myself progressing each and every day. Okay, I go into the class, I teach a lesson for the first time. Let's say I'll teach Nigeria. Okay, it sucks. I don't teach Nigeria very well. I don't know much about it. I go back the next week, I'll teach it better. I'll come back the next month, I'll teach it even better. And I'll just get better each time, because that's progression, from my opinion. Do I earn more? I mean, yeah, but it's not really related to my performance. But still, we know that performance-related pay hasn't really worked out particularly well in the past. I'm progressing all the time. Yeah, it's just infinite progress, always, right? And it doesn't mean I don't have a position. I don't have a little badge. I don't run around the school like I'm some prefect or head boy or something like, look at me, I got this going on. You know, I'd come see my classes if you want to see. Come see my classes, yeah. And if you want to see anything else, you know, I've got a book out as well. So yeah, I see myself as, you know, I do progress and do all that, but I don't necessarily move up and out of the classroom. Look, Nigeria, David, it's a hell of a beast. All right, you gotta know all the facts, the rivers, right? You gotta know hydroelectricity, the fact that they farm so many sweet potatoes and beef for so many people in Africa. So I'll get into that another time. But yeah, Eugene, you're a Senko. Do you feel that you've had to trade off anything in terms of what you do in the class in taking on that role?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think being a Senko is well complex, and it's only getting more and more complex. We've got more and more complex kids.
Mm.
Although this year has been quite difficult because of like COVID and having to do like 2 hours of lunch times every day, which impacts. But yeah, I mean, it's difficult. But then again, I've also got like my place looks after me, and I've tended to teach the kids or make classes whereby it's the kids that are on a record of need anyway. So last year, for the last 2 years, I had like effectively a set 5 English class who were just, and I was really successful with them. Basically just having a mini kind of SEN class we just got on with. But yeah, it's a different perspective, isn't it? And and I think you always got to have the idea that if you're a Senko and you're saying to people, you've got to teach these kids this way, then you need to be able to teach those kids that way.
Yeah.
That's more a pride thing, I think.
What I would wonder as well is, Clive, I'm going to ask you this. All right, do you think that a member of SLT should be able to do the business within the class? Do you think that it should be a requirement to be SLT to be one of, if not one of the best teachers, one of the better teachers? Where do you stand on that one, Clive?
Do they need to be the best teacher? No. Do they need to know what the best teacher would look like? Yes. I think that if we're going to only promote the best teachers in the classroom, then we're actually going to be depriving the students of things. And the two leadership and management of a school are very different to being able to explain the importance of all the rivers and crops that are grown in Nigeria. I think that taking the best teachers out of the classroom and putting them into leadership positions isn't going to do education any favors.
No, I think that's true, isn't it? There is a difference between being able to recognize something and know it's good. Like, you might be an art critic or a restaurant critic. It doesn't mean you're a good chef or a painter. So I guess I see what you're saying. It's for that kind of analogy. And Tom Rogers saying the same thing. Jose Mourinho, Jurgen Klopp, football managers who were, not very great players. So be it saying, I want to know how to develop. So someone from SLT should be able to show me. I think that's fine. But that would also potentially relate to mentoring. And you can be a mentor as a kind of, I don't know if it's TLR or what, but I know that you can choose to be a mentor and you don't necessarily have to be SLT for that. So I think that's a good point, but you might not necessarily be observing a member of SLT, especially if they're on a reduced timetable. SLT, do they have to take as someone's asking about, Barlow is asking about modeling the behavior strategy in action. Eugene, do you reckon you have to be able to manage behavior effectively as a member of SLT? And is it the responsibility of the SLT to deal with the behavior? What do you reckon?
1, yes. 2, yes. But saying it's just SLT responsibility is a cop-out. It's the whole school's responsibility. But SLT ultimately have got to be there to be that kind of line in the sand. So they've got to model that behaviour. And also, SLT need to be, if there's a problem, it's their duty to stand in the way between the class and the teacher and the problem. If you've got a difficult parent rocking up, you've got to be there going, well, hold on, you talk to me, you don't go and have a go at the teacher. And that's part of it as well. You start looking after the staff bit.
Yeah, I think as well, when it comes to if you put your head in the sand, that's not a good strategy. If you're not walking around, if you're not visible, I've seen some great SLT. They're all visible. They all do the business. They help out where they can, and that's something that I really do believe that a lot of SLT should be doing. But I don't necessarily think they have to be some kind of juggernaut to barges into the class and just immediately silences any disruption. I don't know if they have to be on that kind of Terminator level of behavior management, but I do think it's So in terms of anything else, when we think about the culture, what is the biggest factor in a school culture then? If we're thinking about SLT, we're saying teachers need to take responsibility. And we know that retention is a huge problem as well. How do you fix the problem of culture, Clive? What do you reckon would be a good way of SLT and teachers working together in order to make sure that the school culture is more, enables better retention? What do you think?
I think you straight away you need to be looking at your core values as a leader, on how you're going to put those across to the rest of your team. The biggest issues that I see are where you don't necessarily have that communication, you don't have that collaboration, you don't have humility, and I think that that's one of the challenges that teaching has that logistics doesn't have, is you're dealing with normally motivated people that are highly educated, that have good opinions quite often, and that you need to be able to listen to those voices, filter out what is noise, perhaps ideological distractions, and get that core of what's going to work. I've always led or managed in business through inclusion, so making sure that people know that their voices are heard and that I'm going to listen to them, I'm going to value them and respect them. You get a lot more buy-in from that. If you've just talking to trainees that have said that they've only ever seen their head teacher once on the corridors, and that if they were asked to pop in and see their head, they would automatically think they were in trouble. Whereas I pop in and see my head teacher all the time, and I think that having that sort of that level of access and that mutual respect is something that's definitely good for changing a culture within a school. People assume, I think, that if you're ex-forces, you're very tell and do. You'll do exactly as I tell you to do. You'll do it when I tell you to do it. Whereas people couldn't be further from the truth, to be honest. The military runs on respect. People know where they sit in a hierarchy, and where the book stops. But people do things out of respect for each other normally.
Okay, and one thing I will say now is that we're coming towards the end of the show. It's been excellent. We will also have a kind of plenary, if you like, if you want a gimmicky name for how we're going to finish this. Yeah, I'm going to play the news for you guys, because obviously, there's a lot of that's been going on in education recently. So I'm going to play the news, and then we'll have a kind of mini plenary at the end to wrap things up nicely and get an outstanding grading for this show. So I'm going to play the news. Here you go.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News with Tom Hopkins-Burke.
This is Tom Hopkins-Burke with your weekend Teachers Talk Radio News. The Institute of Fiscal Studies has warned that measures to help children catch up on lost learning could arrive too late. IFS researchers stated that if new spending is only announced in the autumn, the actual measures could be delayed well into 2022, potentially too late to effectively make up for lost learning. The IFS has also warned that the government's catch-up fund equates to £100 per pupil per year, well below the £1,600 per pupil being spent in the United States. The warning follows the resignation of Education Recovery Commissioner Sir Kevin Collins, who condemned the £1.4 billion recovery fund for children as far short of what is needed. Public Health England data shows that the Delta COVID-19 variant has affected around 1 in 250 schools. Also known as the Indian variant, the Delta variant has been linked to 97 confirmed COVID-19 outbreaks in primary and secondary schools in the last 4 weeks. Professor Christina Pargle from University College London said that the rise of the Delta variant meant that the government needs to get serious about reducing cases in schools. The Delta variant is more likely to lead to hospitalisations than the Alpha variant first detected in Kent, although the second vaccine dose is likely to help protect against Delta. A pioneering business in Hartlepool has been set up to help prevent gaming addiction in children. Jack Story aims to raise awareness about the dangers of gaming and provide help to youngsters suffering from gaming addiction. Funded by the National Lottery, the business is run by former Hartlepool teacher David Bradley and occupational therapist Charlotte Bell. Mr. Bradley told the Hartlepool Mail that, "We are quite pro-gaming because it's amazing. It's all about the dangers of the unsafe side of it." Teachers Talk Radio is looking for a new weekend newsreader. Email teacherstalkradio@gmail.com for more information. That was your weekend education news with Tom Hopkins Burke.
Shout out Tom Hopkins Burke on the news there. Excellent. Kids, stay away from the games. You might get addicted. And let's carry on with what we're doing. Mini plenary, however you pronounce it. So, I suppose the final piece of the puzzle, or the sort of plank in the sort of patio of discussion that I've been crafting, is the Chartered College of Teaching. We've talked about masters. We've talked about how they could be conceived as inadequate. And we might also think about a new body that could change things. Now, I was quite ignorant of the Chartered College of Teaching. I know it's quite, how could Samuel Elliot ever be ignorant? I know I was. Okay, I was ignorant of it. I thought it was just some kind of label or some letters you put on the end of your name, but I was corrected, and it does seem that it ties to a sort of level of experience, and that it could perhaps professionalize teaching, making it into like a professional organization on a par with accountancy, for instance. Clive, could you sort of remedy the ignorance that I am broadcasting right now and tell people a little bit more about the Chartered College, and then we can sort of dissect that a little further?
So I found out about the Chartered College when I was at uni. I didn't need to be convinced to join. Because membership of professional bodies has been part of my life since joining the trade in the army, and all the way through my career in logistics. For me, it's a way to promote how serious you are about your career or your professional status. And I've lost count of how many times I've heard or read on Twitter, I'm just a teacher, as we've just said, and that's an attitude that we need to change. Yes, you're a teacher. Be proud of that. And I think that with the Chartered College of Teaching, it's success in our profession is not limited to how fast you fly up that ladder. And realistically, that by doing more work with the college, getting it out there from a regional perspective, we're going to be able to do a lot more for raising those that standing for classroom teachers, so that they're feeling that they've got a voice nationally that's not linked to a union. So this is the whole reason why I stood for election to get onto the council earlier this year. I think it's really important that we've got a body that recognises what classroom teachers do, and that's very much linked to making sure that we've got opportunities to be able to be able to show that progression, and that the status that we've been talking about all evening, really, of how are you a better teacher through the CPD that you're doing, and the chartered teacher qualifications is a prime example of that. It's an 18-month course. You've got to be videoed. You've got master's level work, assignments that need to be done, and you get given a mentor. So I think that the Chartered College is a great opportunity for us to be able to do that.
Okay, well, here's one for you then. What about if we made masters, scrap masters, completely irrelevant, say it's completely irrelevant, and then say Chartered College qualification, either fellowship, is it? I don't know what the MCCT one is, but FCCT is fellowship of the Chartered College, correct? And
yeah, it is. So membership of the Chartered College of Teaching, if you're a teacher, you can apply to become a member, and as long as you fit the criteria, you can join. For the fellows for the Chartered College have to have been teaching for 10 years. And for me, that's too late. But I think by having, for us to be chartered, the same way as chartered engineers, accountants, you join the bar in law. I think that would be the the ideal for me. That would be the pinnacle of being able to show that, as a profession, we are valued, we take ourselves seriously, and that, it raises the status within society. I think it gives us an argument as to why are teachers paid so much less than other professions that have got similar qualifications. We're seen as a vocation. It's if you look at that, and you look at all the careers that are seen as vocations, we're notoriously poorly paid, and that's not right. And so you can't have the responsibility of being able to produce the next generation of engineers, of doctors, of solicitors, of biomedical scientists that are producing vaccines for the global pandemic. And that's teachers are responsible for all of that. And I think the sooner that we acknowledge that, even if you're just a classroom teacher, the better. And I think that having that chartered status was a long way to do that. And if something like chartered teacher was that route through, of where you do your PGCE, you do say 5 years. If the prereq to get on the course is 3 years, so you do say 3 years in the classroom, and then you start working on your chartered teacher. By the time you finish at that 5 year point, you would have chartered status, and I think that would be a really good move.
Okay, so two potential objections then. Obviously, there's the money involved. I don't know whether there could be a funding option to come over that. So obviously, money. Is it viable in terms of money? And then also, could it create a 2-tier system? What do you reckon?
We already have a 2-tier system, don't we? We've got main pay scale teachers and upper pay scale teachers. So realistically, you'd be using that as being perhaps the threshold that you need to pass to become an upper pay scale teacher, because that's it after your 6 year point.
What about funding?
Funding would be another issue, wouldn't it? I know that it's not ridiculously expensive. It's like £1,000 to go and do. Realistically, if we were to look at other careers, such as, as I said, my wife's a midwife, she has to pay an annual subscription to be able to practice as a midwife. So is that something that we put on teachers, that we have to go and do to get that chartered status, to then be able to progress up the pay scale? Is it something that we can almost if you're paying for membership to a chartered body, do they then take that as you're paying to do the qualification is offset against your membership costs? That would have to be something we'd have to look at a level much higher than me and you, I think.
Yeah, I think what you're saying in terms of, look, money, that MCCT thing, that looks like some decent value. 45 quid. That's not bad at all. But
yeah,
go on.
I'm saying, I think, you get the impact journal, you got access to all the CPD, unlimited for free. The connections and the networking I've been able to do just on the base of that is phenomenal. And as soon as I'm eligible, I'll be trying to find somebody that will sponsor me, because you have to get to become a fellow, you have to be sponsored. So where am I at now? So I've got another 5 and a bit years before I'm even eligible to apply for the fellowship. But when I am eligible, I'll be wanting to do that, because I want to. I do believe that becoming a fellow within the chartered college, it's important. I want to use my current role on the council to promote the status of teaching, of classroom teachers. I think it's important.
Okay, so what we have come to, basically, we're at the end of the show. As a sort of wrap up, could you just give me a sort of summarize in a couple of words, what did you think of my apprenticeships and my master's tweets? Because obviously loads and loads and loads of people have seen them and thought what a wonderful person and how intelligent I am for posting them. What's your final thoughts on the 2 tweets, Clive? What do you reckon?
I think some people just want to watch the world burn, mate.
Brilliant. Okay, so watching the world burn or listening to it on a podcast with me, I hope you've enjoyed it. I've done my best to tell some funny stories, and also Clive has told some really interesting stories with some anecdotes, and Eugene has hopped on as well and given some Badger Ed love. So shout out to Badger Ed people. That's it for today. So thank you, Clive, and thank you, Eugene. Cheers, guys.
Thanks for having me, mate.
Thanks. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.